We have no further speakers for this item, Chair.
Thank you. Then I'll return to the board for action. Supervisor McPherson.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. I want to start by quoting the staff report. A key phrase that we should keep in mind. It's, quote, the evolution of the CORE program, including the development of this request for proposal, has been community informed, board and city council approved, and staff implemented. I want to thank those also who were on this committee, the RFP panelists, and those people who came here to speak to let us know today. It's not a surprise, and I'm really glad that you let your feelings be known. This ever really started in 2015 and has undergone a continual revision, improvement over the time with numerous public hearings and meetings and private consultations with community board organizations. The board did direct staff to develop and implement a fair and data-driven, transparent RFP process that involved professional consultants and content experts who could approach evaluating the proposals without a bias or conflict of interest. And I do think they really did that to the best of their ability. The aim was really to grade programs based on documented outcomes and collective impacts among other criteria, along with the county's operational goals and objectives toward improving how we serve the community. With all the grant programs, however, there will be those who are recommended for funding and others who are not, and which is the difficulty we're grappling with it today, and we have for my 10 years on the Board of Supervisors. That difficulty really should not call into question the high standards we set, I think, for the process as it is, but rather should be viewed as our way of trying to address the best ways to serve the community. And by the numbers, this really can be an overall win-win situation for everybody. I mean, when you have 127 applications from 78 organizations going after $5.8 million when there are $15.6 million of requests, it's pretty obvious we're not going to be able to please most people or many of the organizations. But we have to do the best we can with what we have. And I encourage the programs who are not recommended for funding to participate in the appeals process. And I know some of you don't think that's adequate, but this is the system we put into place, and that is why we set it up, for there to be a transparent process. And I do believe this has been transparent throughout the process to address those concerns. Without unraveling the thread of the sweater, I think it was mentioned, there's one program I can say, and I hope we can't start nitpicking every of one of the 27 applications, but there's one program I think it should be known that I cannot support for being part of the recommended distribution, and that's the Harm Reduction Coalition's expansion into the South County as recommended by the CORE panel. And the reason is I've repeatedly voted against and with the majority of this board to prioritize our own health services agency, its own syringe services program. And we have also directed staff to tackle the syringe litter issue that itself is a public health program and so far has not been comprehensively addressed. So I support harm reduction as a public health goal, but this recommendation, I don't believe it complies with the previous board direction, and there's not been enough time for us, for this organization to demonstrate the ability to partner with the county on achieving all of our goals for harm reduction. So that's the only point that I would question on this overall proposal. And I do hope those who have expressed their opinions will take part in the appeal process, and that we can have a clear picture of where we're going to go and why, if any changes are made by June 28th. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor McPherson. Supervisor Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I want to take a moment and appreciate everyone who came out today to let their voices be heard. And then obviously for the work that people are doing day to day to make, to provide a safety net in our community, to improve quality of life, to serve people in need and families in need. It's remarkable work, and you know, in a better, more perfect world, we would have the resources, as folks said, to fund everybody and more for the work, because the needs are great and the resources are scarce. I will say there were some comments about how like this feels uncomfortable, this feels bad. I don't want to have to pick people who lose funding and everything else. But I got to say, the reason we haven't had this hard conversation in the past was because people weren't allowed to participate. Groups like the Teen Kitchen Project, Food What, Jacob's Heart, Saludi Carino, the Homeless Garden Project, and then increased funding for Dientes and NAMI, they weren't allowed to apply for the last 5 years and get any funding. And prior to that, those who have been on these boards for a while and have watched this process, they weren't allowed to apply for existing pools and funding. So in some ways, we didn't have to have a hard conversation because new people weren't allowed to participate, new groups and organizations weren't allowed to participate. And so I recognize that this is a hard moment and a hard hearing, and I have a hunch it's going to be a hard couple of weeks and an additional hearing. But I do think, you know, that's because we've opened up this process, and when you open up a process and invite a lot of new groups into the room, it makes the existing resources more scarce, and it's more difficult. In the hopes of moving forward, I'd like to make a motion that at least the board can consider as we go, which would be recognizing this is a first stage in a process. There's going to be many more. One, we approve recommended actions. Two, we remove the $145,000 funding recommendation for the Harm Reduction Coalition as is inconsistent with prior board direction to prioritize the county's own syringe services program and systematically address syringe litter, as Supervisor McPherson mentioned. We direct staff to return on 6/28 with recommendations to redirect the $145,000 consistent with the process framework approved by the board for CORE and in consultation with board offices. And then 4, we direct staff to return to the board on 6/28 with elements that will be included in the CORE contracts for countywide service provisions. In other words, there's both who gets funded, but once we fund people, how do those programs get operationalized across the county? So that's my motion.
I'll second the motion if it's proper. Yeah.
Sure. Motion by Supervisor Coonerty, second by Supervisor McPherson. Thank you, Supervisor Caput. All right. Yes.
I have just a question. It's a technical question. I don't know if our CAO counselor, you as the chair, I want to just make sure I understand what's being voted on in terms of the additional direction. Is that something I should ask for after your vote or before your vote? Because where the staff needs to operationalize that. So I just know technically when's the time to ask that question.
County Council.
Well, I think I did want to ask a question about the motion just to clarify as to the $135,000. Or $145,000, I heard a clause that that would be discussed and deliberated on with board members. And I want to be sure that we're in recognizing Brown Act issues. And I'm wondering whether the motion can be amended to eliminate that clause.
Sure. So the clause, the exact clause was that it would be consistent with the CORE process framework and in consultation with board offices. And so
I have concerns about that clause. And so I would recommend striking that clause. That the recommendations be made in consultation with board offices.
Okay, I'll strike that clause.
And may I ask if it's appropriate for me to ask one? That was one of my questions. Is this appropriate, Chair? Is that I heard three parts to it, Supervisor Coonerty. One was the Supervisor McPherson in your second. It sounds like the board's going to support removal of the 145. Then I heard the return on 628 with a recommendation. After that, I'm hearing it's being striked in consult with boards. But there was a follow-up one that I missed, and I tried to write it down. Something about for us when we return on the 28th to be clear about what we plan to list in the contracts. I just want to make sure I understand what that direction was so we can comply with that for return on the 28th.
Yeah, so it's just what elements will be included in the core contracts for the provision of countywide services.
Okay, I think I understand. So we can be clear in the board report for the 28th, how we recommend to operationalize that, and your board could deliberate and public could comment, and we'll execute whatever the final decision is when we execute contracts.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if we're all clear on the motion, then clerk, roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Friend,
Aye.
Coonerty,
Aye.
Caput, McPherson, and Koenig.
Aye.
That item passes unanimously as amended.